Let me start with a number that should get your attention. 250 crore rupees. That's the kind of penalty that sits behind the security obligations we are about to discuss. Suddenly, reasonable security safeguards doesn't sound like vague boilerplate anymore, does it? In this chapter, we're going to unpack Rule 6, the rule that tells you how to actually protect the data you hold. We'll begin by figuring out what reasonable security even means, because it's deliberately not a rigid checklist. Then we'll explore the proportionality standard, the idea that your safeguards should match your risk. We'll get concrete with encryption, access controls, and masking, and then move into logging and monitoring, including that important one-year log retention rule. We'll cover backups and business continuity because protecting data also means not losing it. We'll look at the security obligations that flow down to your processors, and we'll put the penalty context in perspective so you understand the stakes. Then, we'll walk through a safeguards gap assessment as a worked example and close with a checklist. Security is where a lot of compliance programs either prove themselves or fall apart. So let's get this right together. Let's begin. Let's start by wrestling with a phrase that frustrates a lot of people: reasonable security safeguards. Your first instinct might be, just tell me exactly what to install and I'll do it. But the rules deliberately don't work that way, and there's wisdom in that. Let me explain. If the law specified one exact technology, it would be outdated the moment attackers found a way around it. So instead, the standard is reasonable, which means appropriate to your situation. This is the official idea, but let me put it more simply. Reasonable security means doing what a sensible, competent organization in your position would do to protect the data it holds. Think about locking up your home. There's no law saying you must install exactly this brand of lock. But a reasonable person fits a decent lock, maybe an alarm if they're in a higher risk area. You'd judge someone who left their door wide open as careless. Reasonable security applies that same common sense judgment to data. The catch and the opportunity is that reasonable scales with context. A small shop and a major bank don't face the same risks, so they aren't expected to do identical things. We'll explore that scaling next. For now, hold this thought. Reasonable isn't a loophole to do the minimum. It's a duty to do what genuinely fits the sensitivity and volume of data you're responsible for. Let's build on that idea of reasonable by introducing the concept that gives it shape: proportionality. Proportionality means your security measures should match the level of risk you're dealing with. The more sensitive the data and the greater the potential harm, the stronger your safeguards need to be. Think about how you protect different things in your own life. You might keep a grocery list on the kitchen counter without a second thought. But your passport, your gold, your important documents, those go in a safe. You instinctively apply proportionality every day. The same logic governs data security. If you're handling highly sensitive financial or health information at scale, the expectations on you are far higher than for a small business holding a handful of email addresses. Here's a real-world way to see it. A neighborhood bakery collecting names for a loyalty program faces very different risks than a hospital storing millions of patient records. Asking both to implement identical heavyweight security would be absurd. Too much for one, possibly too little for the other. Proportionality lets the standard flex to fit. But here's the warning that comes with the flexibility. Proportionality is not an excuse to underinvest. If you handle sensitive data at scale and claim a small budget justified weak security, that argument will not protect you. The honest question to ask is, given what I hold and the harm a breach would cause, am I doing what's genuinely proportionate? Answer that truthfully and you're on the right track. Let's get concrete now with 3 security measures that show up again and again: encryption, access controls, and masking. These are the workhorses, so let me make each one intuitive. Start with encryption. Encryption scrambles data so that even if someone steals it, they can't read it without the key. Think of it like writing your diary in a secret code only you can decode. If a thief grabs the diary, they've got gibberish. So when data is encrypted, a breach becomes far less damaging because the stolen data is unreadable. Next, access controls. This is about making sure only the right people can reach the data. Picture an office building where your keycard opens only the floors you're authorized for. Not everyone gets into every room. In data terms, your marketing team probably shouldn't have access to raw payment details, and your interns shouldn't see everything an administrator can. Access controls enforce that need to know principle. And masking. Masking hides part of the data while keeping it usable. Think of how your card number shows as asterisks with just the last 4 digits visible. The support agent can confirm it's your card without seeing the full number. That's masking, exposing only what's necessary. Here's the instructor's takeaway. These three work together. Encryption protects data at rest and in transit. Access controls limit who can reach it. And masking limits how much they see even when they do. Layer them and you've covered a huge amount of ground. Let's talk about something that often gets neglected until it's too late: logging and monitoring. Here's the principle: you can't protect what you can't see. Logging means keeping records of activity in your systems: who accessed what, when, and what they did. Monitoring means actually watching those logs for signs of trouble. Why does this matter so much? Imagine a shop with security cameras that records everything but that nobody ever reviews. If a theft happens, at least you have footage. But if someone were watching the screens, they might have caught the thief in the act. Logging is the recording. Monitoring is the watching. You really want both. Here's a real-world scenario. Suppose an employee's account suddenly starts downloading huge volumes of customer data at 3 in the morning. If you're logging, the evidence exists. If you're monitoring, an alert fires and someone investigates before the damage spreads. Without either, you might not discover the breach for months, by which point the harm is done and your reporting obligations are already blown. And that's the deeper point. Good logging and monitoring aren't just about catching attackers. They're what let you detect a breach in time to meet your notification duties, which we'll cover in the next chapter. So as you build security, treat logging and monitoring as your eyes and ears. A system you can't observe is a system you can't truly secure. Let's zoom in on a specific, concrete requirement that flows from all this logging talk: the expectation to retain certain logs for a meaningful period, generally pointing to around 1 year. Now you might ask, why keep logs that long? Isn't that just more data to manage? Fair question, so let me explain the reasoning. Breaches and security incidents often aren't discovered immediately. An attacker might quietly sit inside a system for weeks or months before doing damage or being detected. When you finally do discover something, you need to look back in time to understand what happened. How did they get in? What did they touch? How far back does this go? If your logs only stretch back a couple of weeks, that investigation hits a wall. Think of it like a building's CCTV footage. If it's overwritten every 2 days, it's nearly useless when you discover a theft that happened last month. Keeping footage or logs for a substantial window means you can actually reconstruct events. A roughly 1-year retention period strikes a balance. It's long enough to investigate incidents that surface late, but not so long that you're hoarding logs forever. Here's the practical instruction. Make sure your logging systems are configured to retain logs for the expected period and that those logs themselves are stored securely, because logs often contain sensitive details. Don't let your retention quietly default to a few days. When an incident hits, that year of history could be exactly what saves you. Let's talk about a side of security people often forget, because they think security is only about keeping attackers out. But there's another threat: losing the data entirely. That's where backups and business continuity come in. Here's the principle. Protecting data means not just guarding it from theft, but ensuring you don't lose access to it. Think about the times technology has failed you personally. A phone that died and took your photos with it. A laptop that crashed before you saved your work. Now scale that up to an organization holding critical personal data. A server failure, a ransomware attack that locks your files, a fire. Any of these could wipe out access. Backups are your safety net. They're copies of data stored separately so that if the worst happens, you can recover. Imagine a hospital that loses its patient records and has no backup. The consequences could be life-threatening. Now imagine the same hospital restoring everything from a clean backup within hours. That's the difference good preparation makes. Business continuity goes a step further. It's the plan for keeping things running or getting back up quickly when disruption strikes. It asks, if our main systems go down, how do we keep serving people and protecting their data? Here's the instructor's tip. Backups are only as good as your ability to restore from them. So don't just create backups, test them. A backup you've never tried to restore is a promise you haven't verified. Make recovery part of your security thinking, not an afterthought. Let's address something crucial that organizations often overlook: the security obligations of your processors. Remember, a processor is a third party that handles data on your behalf: your cloud provider, your analytics vendor, your payroll service. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When you hand data to a processor, you don't hand off your responsibility. Think about it. If you give your house keys to a cleaning service and they're careless, leaving your door unlocked, the burglary still happens to you. You chose them, you trusted them, and the consequences land on you. Data works the same way. If your processor suffers a breach because of weak security, that's still your problem, and your data principles are still harmed. So the framework expects security to flow down the chain. When you engage a processor, you need contractual arrangements that bind them to appropriate security measures. You can't just assume they'll do the right thing. Picture this. You move all your customer data to a cheap cloud vendor who cuts corners on security to keep prices low. A breach happens. But it was the vendor's fault is not a defense that protects you or your customers. Here's the practical guidance. Vet your processors. Put security obligations in your contracts. Check that they actually have reasonable safeguards, not just promises on paper. And keep some oversight, because outsourcing the work doesn't outsource the accountability. Your security is only as strong as the weakest party you've shared data with. Let's talk about the stakes, because nothing focuses the mind like understanding what's at risk. The DPDP framework carries serious financial penalties, and for failures related to security safeguards, we are talking about figures that can reach up to 250 crore rupees. Let that sink in. Now, why are the penalties set so high? Because the framework wants security to be a board-level concern, not an afterthought delegated and forgotten. When the potential cost of a breach is enormous, organizations are far more likely to actually invest in doing it right. Think about how speed limits work with meaningful fines versus token ones. If speeding cost you a few rupees, you might not care. But if it cost you a fortune, you'd slow down. The scale of the penalty is designed to change behavior. Here's the important nuance though. The penalty isn't automatic for every incident. The framework looks at factors like the nature of the failure, whether you took reasonable measures, and how you responded. An organization that genuinely implemented proportionate safeguards and responded responsibly is in a very different position from one that was negligent and careless. So the lesson isn't panic about the number. The lesson is this is exactly why reasonable security deserves real investment and attention. The penalty context turns security from a nice-to-have into a genuine business risk. When you're making the case to leadership for security budget, this is the argument that lands. Let's make all of this practical by walking through a safeguards gap assessment, the kind of exercise you'd actually run to find your weak spots. Picture a mid-sized e-commerce company called Shop Easy. We're going to assess them against what we've learned. We start by listing what good looks like, then check Shop Easy against each item. Encryption? We find their customer database is encrypted, good, but their backups are stored unencrypted. That's a gap. Access controls? We discover that nearly every employee can access full customer records, including payment details. That's a serious gap. No need to know principle. Logging and monitoring? They have logging enabled, but nobody reviews the logs, and logs are kept for only 30 days. Two gaps: no monitoring and insufficient retention. Backups? They back up nightly, good, but they've never once tested a restore. Gap: an untested backup. Processor security? They use a cloud vendor, but their contract says nothing about security obligations. Gap: see how this works? You hold each safeguard up against reality and honestly note where you fall short. Now, here's your exercise. Take your own organization or one you know and run this same assessment. Go through encryption, access controls, logging, retention, backups, and processor contracts, and mark each as solid or a gap. The gaps you find are your roadmap. This simple, honest audit is often the single most valuable security thing you can do. Let's wrap up Rule 6 with a checklist you can return to whenever you assess your security posture. Start with the foundation. Are your safeguards genuinely proportionate to the sensitivity and volume of data you hold, not just the bare minimum? Then, the core technical measures. Is sensitive data encrypted, both at rest and in transit, including your backups? Are access controls in place so people can only reach the data they actually need? Are you using masking to limit exposure where full data isn't necessary? Move to visibility. Are you logging activity across your systems, and is someone actually monitoring those logs for anomalies? Are logs retained for the expected period, around a year, and stored securely? Now, resilience. Do you have backups, and crucially, have you tested that you can actually restore from them? Do you have a business continuity plan for when systems go down? Next, your supply chain. Do your processor contracts include real security obligations? And have you verified your processors actually meet them? And finally, the accountability question. If a breach happened tomorrow and a regulator asked whether you took reasonable measures, could you show evidence that you did? Run this checklist regularly, not once, because threats evolve, and so must your defenses. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you're notified when the next chapter drops, where we tackle Rule 7 and what happens when, despite all this, a breach actually occurs.